In 1968, on the set of Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, French set dresser Christine Edzard fell in love with British associate producer Richard Goodwin. They decided to work together and, after discovering an early 20th century British author's tales of anthropomorphic animals, turned it into a dance-centric family feature film. No! No! Not that one! The Tales of Beatrix Potter! The film is about the tales of a young Beatrix Potter, played by Erin Geraghty, as she mentally escapes the boredom of a lonely Victorian childhood whilst at her holiday home in the Lake District. The film adapts the tales of Jemima Puddleduck, Pigling Bland, Jeremy Fisher, the Two Bad Mice, Johnny Townmouse and Squirrel Nutkin. There's also little dances with Peter Rabbit and Mrs Tiggywinkle, but they don't actually adapt their respective stories. Presumably, this is because of the humans in both stories, which would have been more difficult to achieve, but it would probably be difficult to sell a Beatrix Potter film without Peter Rabbit. The US release even put him in the title. The dances are nice, but the segments with plots are definitely better. Tabitha Twitchett also turns up at the end, presumably because she appeared in 5 of Potter's books. Neat freak Mrs Tittlemouse can also be seen accompanying Johnny Townmouse, but it makes more sense considering the amount of mice here. The film is a ballet, completely without dialogue, choreographed by Sir Frederick Ashton, the director of the Royal Ballet, and performed by its dancers. However, unlike a lot of other ballet films, this was not an adaptation of a stage show, and you can tell from the way it is shot. I confess that I don't know anything about ballet, but from what I understand, ballet film adaptations for prose shots tend to struggle because they're not made with the intimacy of the screen in mind, and that's certainly not a problem here, as most scenes focus on 1 or 2 dancers. I haven't heard of any of the dancers apart from Wayne Sleep, who played Squirrel Nutkin, and Ashton himself, who played Mrs Tiggywinkle. Whilst it's definitely the least challenging part of the show, I certainly would never have guessed that it was played by a man in his late 60s. The choreography is wonderful in this, properly reflecting the personality and species of the characters. In the words of Roger Ebert, the stories are told simply and directly with a certain almost clumsy charm. Instead of going for perfection in the dancing, the Royal Ballet dancers have gone for characterisations instead. The various animals have their quirks and eccentricities, and they are fairly authentic. The frog dances like a frog, for example, and not like Nureyev. It's incredibly inventive, particularly the ones with the mice's tails. I don't even mind that their faces are completely static, their movement is expressive enough. It's especially impressive when you take into account the terrain on which they danced, such as the book-accurate, slippy-sloppy, wet-tiled floor of Jeremy Fisher's house. On top of that, they had the limited visibility of these heads. I mean, their athleticism would be impressive regardless, but damn! Speaking of masks, apologies for saying this wrong, Rostislav Dobrodzinsky's masks are nothing short of incredible. You see, Beatrix Potter had a very exact visual style. She herself was a scientist, only an amateur in her field because of her gender. This undoubtedly contributed to her animal artwork being incredibly detailed and lifelike, treading a delicate balance between realistic and anthropomorphic. I actually feel annoyed in a way that I do with no other writer when new illustrations are commissioned for her works. It may be unfair, but Potter herself was meticulous with the design of her merchandise, being the first author to really do so. Her illustrations feel inseparable from her writing to me. So, with that in mind, you know that the costumes are good if I like them. They've made them slightly more anthropomorphic in some cases to be practical, and that's it. It really does feel like they leapt from the pages. I don't really think about the fact I'm watching people, if that makes sense. I just can't think of there being a person inside Jemima Puddleduck. I'm just so immersed in this film. I love the little human hands on the mice as well, it just works so perfectly. I was really surprised at how well the production design held up in this film that's now over half a century old. I had assumed when I saw this as a child that all the exteriors were filmed outside, but now I realise that it was shot almost entirely on set at Elstree Studios, with back projection of second unit footage from the Lake District. Honestly, the set design is pretty astounding. The sets are clearly made of real vegetation, and it's difficult to see the join between that and the projections. And that's before talking about the work they did with water tanks to imitate famous lakes. The Lake District is a character in itself in Potter's work, and the film does a great job of showcasing it. The sets of interiors are also very impressive, especially when they play with scale. The exteriors aren't always to scale, but if you're focusing on that, then the film probably isn't working for you anyway. Whilst there is one effect that got a few titters from the adults when I went to see it in the cinema, which I'll talk about it in a minute, it also has effects in it that genuinely impressed me, and I'm still not sure how they did all of them. Even after seeing it on the big screen, it's just so immersive. This was the only directing job for Reginald Mills, an editor who worked on several Powell and Pressburger films featuring ballet, including The Red Shoes, which I haven't seen myself, but I know it's probably the most famous film about ballet. By the way, Edzard went on to become a director best known for adapting classic literature. I'm definitely curious about the rest of her filmography now, so let me know in the comments if there is any work of hers that you'd like me to review in the future. I'm also planning on reviewing 1 or 2 other Beatrix Potter adaptations at some point, so let me know in the comments which ones you'd like to see. As for the soundtrack, it's a combination of existing compositions. I can't play any of it, obviously, but the music during this scene in particular really got me emotionally. If you ask me what the worst part of this movie was as a child, then I'd say that the scene of young Beatrix at her home is very dull. But now I realise that it's a feature, not a bug. It's intentionally boring to contrast with the escape of her colourful imagination. However, the most engaging dances are the ones with plot, and it's 20 minutes before we get to those, which is probably a bit late. As for the plots themselves, I like all of them. The Jemima Puddle Duck sequence does a good job of communicating the story. Pigling Bland's romance with Pigwig is genuinely adorable. The Jeremy Fisher scene packs in a lot of character in very little time. The 2 bad mice are a whole hunker-munker of mischievous fun. The town mouse versus country mouse bit is great, although I admit that I didn't really understand what was going on as a child. I just remembered it for the delightfully chaotic food fight. And the Squirrel Nutkin scene somehow manages to be engaging enough to make this giant static owl intimidating. The stories are shortened and simplified out of necessity to fit the medium of ballet, but are otherwise book accurate. Despite Ashton expressly wishing that it never be adapted for stage, it was adapted 4 years after his death in 1992, receiving mostly negative reviews. However, it has been revived a couple of times since then. All in all, The Tales of Beatrix Potter is an utterly enchanting film that gives the work it adapts the respect it deserves. Whilst I do admit that I may be watching it through rose-tinted glasses, I wasn't expecting to be this impressed by the film as an adult. If anything, I appreciate the technical achievement more. Whilst I'm certainly no expert, I am a fan of Potter's work, but I think that means my standards are higher when it comes to adaptations of it. This has an unadulterated abundance of quaint, heartwarming charm without being saccharine. I definitely recommend it to fans of Potter's work. Again, I know nothing about ballet, but I know that Frederick Ashton is considered one of the great choreographers, so I imagine it's a treat for ballet fans. As I said earlier, I went to see this on the big screen. Shout out to the Garden Cinema in London for doing these pay-what-you-can screenings of a variety of old family films. Because of that, I wasn't sure if the parents knew going in that this film would be entirely without dialogue, and I was curious to see how the kids would handle it. Plenty of kids were a bit restless, but they were all very well behaved. They whispered to their parents a bit to ask for snacks and stuff, slightly more than I think they would for any other movie. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter, because there wasn't any dialogue in the film that they could talk over. Basically, I'm saying this to say that modern kids should be entertained enough by this film. They might struggle with the first 20 minutes, and it would probably have to compete with other distractions at home, but if they have the patience to stick with it, they'll probably enjoy it. If you want to hear me talk about another underrated British family movie, you can watch my review of Cosgrove Hall's 1989 animated adaptation of the BFG right here. See you soon!
Hi there, honey. What you doing for dinner?